Welcome back to the channel. My name is Jeff. This is Jeff Reads, and today I'm going to be comparing the Lord of the Rings books written by J.R.R. Tolkien to the Lord of the Rings films directed by Peter Jackson and written by Jackson, Philippa Boyens, and Fran Walsh. I just finished doing a two-part episode on a reread of Lord of the Rings, which I just recently finished a couple weeks ago. I'll link that down in the description box. Really enjoyed the hell out of reading Rings again. Probably the first time I'd read the books in a good 10 years. But I wanted to kind of do a movie book comparison because I'm a big fan of the movies. I think Jackson did a tremendous job with the films, and there are differences. And some of the choices that he made in the movies, I think, reflects well on him as someone who really understood the books and translated them to the screen. Just, to me, those movies are a miracle. Number one, that Jackson was allowed to make all three at once. He was allowed to, they bankrolled all these movies to be done at once. I mean, what a dice roll. I mean, the Marvel machine hadn't even gotten out of the gate yet when this deal went. And I think it was probably historic, allowing a filmmaker to make three films before the first one had even come out. I mean, what a gamble New Line made, and came out, amazing. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this, and I want to caveat this. Any, quotidian Ringsers out there, I'm not going to do a detailed list of every single thing that was different about the movies from the books. There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of things that were different. What I'm going to do is point out some of the big differences, because those are the things that, to me, are indicative of and I want to talk a little bit about his choices, doing some of the big changes. And there might be a few little ones in there that I just happen to notice that I'll throw in. But by the end of this video, if you're throwing stuff around in your apartment or your house and saying he forgot this and he didn't mention that, and this was different and that was different, this guy sucks. Just I'm caveating this down by saying you're right, I do suck. But I only picked, I only cherry picked a bunch of the big stuff to talk about. All right, so I just wanted to get that out of the way going in. So I want to talk about first the plotting of the movies and the plotting of the books. And the first thing that you notice right away, in the beginning, when Bilbo has the long expected party and disappears and leaves, in the books, 17 years passes between that night and when Frodo finally sets out by himself with the ring to head to Rivendell. In the movies, it was, I think, a matter of months at most. You get the impression. And it makes perfect sense. I mean, these are the kind of decisions that I think Jackson very smartly made. To belabor the point that Gandalf was gone for 17 years, it wouldn't make sense. Movie audiences wouldn't kind of make sense, because we're not really inculcated on how old hobbits are. We don't get we're not going to know exactly, like, well, hobbits live to like their 150 or so odd years. So of course, 17-year gap wouldn't be a big deal. It's going to be lost on a general movie audience, and frankly on a lot of Tolkienites who may have forgotten how long it was. So that was a big deal, but I thought it was a very good choice in not putting needless things in the movies that are going to just off-put the audience for the sake of being, slavish to the books. And I think he was great at this. The biggest thing that he did was he skipped 4 chapters in Fellowship. So once Frodo sets out with the ring, there are a bunch of chapters, Conspiracy Unmasked, which is one where they spend a little bit of time they go back to Buckland, and they go to this house, and they sleep over, and then they decide to go to the ford the next day. In the movies, right when they leave, they head right to the ford. Merry and Pippin are with them. There's no other extra plot. And again, very smart. You didn't, the things here, these four chapters actually in Fellowship, to me, are the most, not egregious, but they're the most ones that in Tolkien that were really outside the main story. That when I recognized that Jackson didn't include them, I thought, oh, brilliant, because they're not tied in. You can pull them out and have absolutely no gaps in terms of the story. So you can do the flight to the ford from Bag End to the ford, and from there right to Bree. And so what he skips is, again, the conspiracy unmasked when they're in the house in Buckland. He skips the whole adventure in the book of the Old Forest, where they go through the Old Forest and they get trapped, and they have to get rescued by Tom Bombadil. They skip the chapter called In the House of Tom Bombadil, which is basically a chapter of, horses serving cream to our hobbits, and Tom Bombadil taking the ring and not disappearing. They also don't include the next chapter, which is The Fog on the Barrow Downs, where the hobbits leave Tom Bombadil, and they get stuck in with Barrow Wights, and they get trapped and brought underground. All of that was skipped, and I think it was very smart to skip because it is all very incidental. Bombadil never comes back into the story in any way. Going through the Old Forest doesn't do anything with character or plot, and the Barrow Downs doesn't do it anyway. I mean, if I was Tolkien's editor, I think at the time, I might have been like, why do you have these in here? Why don't you strip these out, and why don't they go right to Bree? These don't have anything to do with the story. So I felt that Jackson was very smart and didn't waste a lot of money and screen time filming those episodes because they really don't play into the main story. I enjoy reading them. When I'm reading the novel, I'm happy to sprawl with Tolkien when he wants to sprawl because I'm getting the language, I'm getting the description, I'm getting more of the feel of the world, and I like that. In fantasy novel, I don't mind a little sprawl and a little slower pace so I can do, the world building can kind of sink in. But, in a Hollywood, 2.5 hour, 3 hour feature, you got to move, if there's some story to tell, you have to move. So I thought it was really smart. I did not mind one bit that he went right to Bree. So the other big change, actually right after Bree, is so when after Frodo gets stabbed by the Black Rider, and they're trying to get him to Rivendell. In the films, Arwen shows up, who's kind of Aragorn's betrothed. In the book, it's Glorfindel, who's a male elf. So Glorfindel comes and he takes Frodo and rides and rescues him. But I thought it was smart for Jackson to use Arwen because in the book, Tolkien does not do enough to show us the relationship between Arwen and Aragorn. It's really underplayed. You barely get a sense that there is this betrothal to happen until she shows up at the end, when he's crowned king. But to introduce Arwen in that way, I thought was a feminist choice, which was fantastic, that she has agency and power, and that she is this very strong elf, and then to add on the scenes where you're showing Aragorn as saying like, go to the Grey Havens with your people, I'm out. So they show that, and that she's really sad about it. And he pushes her away because he doesn't want her to die. She can live, she's almost immortal, elves. And for his sake, he doesn't want her to sacrifice that for him. But Tolkien does not really play that up in the book. Unfortunately, it makes Aragorn a lesser character because it does add to his character. So I thought it was very smart of Jackson to play that up. I think some of this is in the appendix of Return of the King. I haven't read it, but I feel like some of the appendix has some of this in it. But Jackson put it in, and not only does he bring Arwen up to be a full-fledged character in some respects, but it also helps Aragorn's character and fleshes out that whole story. So it was just a very smart choice to do that. So also another thing he did to add to Aragorn's character, in the book, you don't really get a sense that Aragorn is doubting himself. Now, he's from the line of Elendil and Isildur, right? And Isildur is the one who took the ring and got killed. So in the book, there's no doubt on Aragorn. He gets his new sword. He's going to do the right thing. He's a pretty stolid guy. I hate saying this because I love the books and always will prefer them over the films, but he's a less interesting character in the books than in the movies. In the movie, he's got the thing with Arwen, and now in the films, Jackson plays up his fear over like, I have the same blood as Isildur, and the same weakness flows through my veins, and he uses Arwen to tell him, you're gonna do fine. Like a real couple. She's like, no, honey, you're going to do this right. It'll be fine. So again, another very good choice. And it makes Aragorn a little more flesh and blood. Whereas in the books, he's a little more, he's the king in waiting. He's this ranger, Dunedain, elder Númenorian. And Tolkien kind of puts him a little bit on a pedestal. which is fine. I mean, he is what he is in the books, and I don't have any complaints. But I respect what Jackson did in trying to flesh him out as a film character, and was able to put more meat on his bones by making those choices. So I really thought that was great. Okay, so some nits. When they choose to go over the mountains instead of under Moria at first, Caradhras, the Cruel, is the mountain that they go over. In the book, the mountain itself is its own entity and has its own power and its own kind of magic, as it were. And it's throwing these things down and blocking their way just out of just sheer malice. In the film, they're showing us that Saruman is actually what's causing it. So Saruman, from his perch in Orthanc, knows that they're there because of the Crebain, those black birds that flew. They were Saruman's birds. So he finds out that they're there, and he uses his own power to bring the mountain down upon them. And I thought, that's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. Like, I didn't mind that so much. But I think what Jackson did was, and what he's doing as he goes forward in Tolkien, is he's taking incidental actions and incidental things that happen in the book, and he's trying to knit them together in a more unified thing for the film. So, again, who cares if Glorfindel, right? Glorfindel rescuing Frodo is very incidental. He comes in, he rescues Frodo, we never see him again. What does he do there? Oh, why don't we bring in a character who we can play up a little more and bring more into the story by placing them in that position. Boom, there's Arwen. And then the same here. I think, well, why don't we have Saruman be the cause of this, to just bring him into the story and unify all the things that are happening to these characters, begin to unify as a more complete story. Whereas in Tolkien, it's more episodic, and it's not episodic, but it's more random. And again, you don't mind when you're reading. It's just Caradhras is this weird, strange, cruel mountain. It's just part of the world building, and it's part of the lore, and it's strange and creepy and crazy in its own way. You like it. And because the books sprawl, it works. But I think in a film, Jackson was very smart to try to unify it, to keep things tight together and propulsively forward. Another thing that happens, so after they go to King of the Golden Hall, and they rouse the Rohan, they're heading towards Helm Deep, and there's a warg attack. So the big wolves, they have this big attack, and in the attack, Aragorn is seemingly slain. He goes over a cliff, right? Never happens in the books. There's no warg attack, so obviously there's no Aragorn disappearing over the hill. This was completely a concoction of Jackson. And this is one thing where I'll take him to task. I think he wanted to create some drama. I think you could have just got him to Helm's Deep and you would have been fine, but you have the warg attack, so there's another action sequence. And then the kind of the fake death of Aragorn now creates this drama where everyone's really sad and mopey, and Eowyn is like, "Where is Aragorn? Is he dead?" And then you get this grand entrance where he pushes the doors open and he comes back, and it's he has returned. I don't know. Was it necessary? Movies are a spooky business, so it's possible that that beat did something under the waterline in terms of story that was right. But cerebrally, I'm sort of like, I don't know. It just seemed like one of those. He did so much more of that in the Hobbit films, where there was so much more incidental action that had no stakes. It didn't matter. He only did it kind of once, from what I can recall, and that was the only time he did it. And I think if he had done more of those kind of things, it would have undercut the heft of the films. But he didn't. So I wasn't really a fan of it. I just thought it was a little bit cheap. So there we go. Another change he made, and again, this is very similar to the Glorfindel-Arwen swap. So at the end of the Battle of Helm's Deep, in the film, you have Gandalf and Eomer, right? And Eomer was banned. He's out there with his army, sort of doing things. Gandalf goes and finds him, brings him. In the book, it's Erkenbrand. So you have Eomer out there, and then all of a sudden you have this other Rohan soldier named Erkenbrand and his band of people. And Gandalf finds Erkenbrand, and they come and save the day. And again, this is Jackson saying, it's too random. Why Erkenbrand? Why not Eomer? Eomer's already been introduced. We know him. He's there. He's out in the country with his own band of marauders. Why wouldn't he be the one to come and save the day? And it makes perfect sense. So again, yet another example of Jackson trying to knit knit the disparate things together to make the film feel more whole. And I think it was very smart. And just an aside, the Battle of Helm's Deep was astonishing. Probably one of the best battle scenes ever filmed. And not because it was so showy and cutty, but because it did long takes and because you knew where you were. You understood the geography of Helm's Deep, the wall, the larger tower, the causeway, the little culvert at the bottom of the wall. Like, you could see all that stuff. And as the battle progressed, you saw each new development. When one power would get over on another one, you saw how everything happened. And it was like such a pleasure to watch a battle where it just wasn't like, a rousing music, a lot of quick cuts of guys with swords and stabbing, and then it's over, and it's like, well, we won. Like, you could see on screen very clearly how this battle was won and lost and who won and lost it. You didn't need anyone to tell you. You saw it all, and it was done all in camera. And I thought that was what a wonderful, wonderful breath of fresh air that was. Coming in, was it 2001, 2002? Two Towers came out. I think Game of Thrones probably ran with that. I think their battle scenes were of a similar way. The few that I've seen, I think they took a page from that. But it was amazing, just an amazing battle scene. Better than the one in Return of the King, frankly. It's my favorite battle scene in the whole three films. One other Helm's Deep knit, Haldir of the elves shows up with his kind of cadre of elf archers. Does not happen in the book. No elves show up to help defend Helm's Deep. It's pretty much just Rohan with our band of warriors, and that's it. We had met Haldir at LotH in the previous film, so Jackson's like, all right, let's knit this together and let's have the elves come and serve, and showing in a way how the disparate elements of Middle-earth are going to try to combine again to fight Sauron. So I didn't mind that as something new to add to it. I thought it was fine, and they all died, so it was pretty. It added a little bit of tragedy because when elves die, it's kind of a big deal since they live so long. If they're relatively young and they die in battle, like, it's no joke. So the end of Two Towers was some addition. Frodo at Osgiliath, right? So in the book, when Frodo's taken captive by Faramir and they have this whole thing, the Forbidden Pool, Faramir decides to let them go. He just takes them to this crossroads and they head in to Mordor. There's no battle scene. He doesn't take them through a battle, and there's no kind of crazy stuff that goes on. But I guess to end the Two Towers, they wanted to end it with some level of, because I think Two Towers in the book ends with, basically, the downfall of Saruman and then Shelob. So I think they wanted to end it on a larger note. So Two Towers ends with Sam and Frodo at Osgiliath with Faramir, and this is where Faramir visually sees and feels what's happening with the ring and decides to let them go. Okay, big. Doesn't really change the nature of things, and I think what Jackson wanted to do was to, rather than Faramir, be basically swayed by Sam, which Sam kind of gives him this whole big speech in the cave, and in the book, Faramir's like, yeah, you're right. I'm gonna let you guys go, and it's the right thing to do. And it's not much of a change. So I think for a film director, somebody like Jackson, it's like, that's not dramatic enough. So what he wants to do is kind of bring you along a little more. So he makes it a little more difficult for Faramir to make that choice, and he drags it out. And you think that Faramir is going to bring him back to Gondor. But then they get waylaid at Osgiliath, and they have this whole battle, and that's when Faramir sees all this stuff, sees what happens to Frodo, sees the Black Rider on this dragon that he's on, and that kind of, he's like, okay, I get it. This is not something that we're going to be able to take and wield and use. Go and do your thing. And to me, it works. It's one of the choices that you make, I think, when you're trying to bring the spirit of a book across in a film, and you don't necessarily need to do it slavishly. I think Jackson did so much. He did so much the same. He brought the book over scene by scene in so many ways. And that when he did differ, again, it's in these ways that were smart to do, and I thought in my mind were correct. So the Saruman, the theatrical release, you do not see the demise of Saruman. He basically, when he's stuck up in Orthanc, you leave him and you don't see him again for the rest of the film series. In the extended editions, they bring in this dialogue now that Saruman has with Gandalf at Orthanc, which is so wonderful in the books. Really is terrific. And it's there that he dies. Wormtongue throws him out of the window and he lands on some machinery and dies. And then Legolas kills him, which is kind of a transposition from in the book where he makes it all the way back to the Shire and Saruman makes it to the very end of the book. And he's killed by Wormtongue and then Wormtongue is killed by hobbits. So it's kind of the same way he dies. But since they don't do the Scouring of the Shire in the movies, which I'll get to, I don't know, 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. I mean, really Saruman's thing when he's taken out and he's finished, his part of the story is done. So I understood where in the theatrical releases that Jackson decided to just kind of like, let's move on. We've got story to tell, and now Saruman doesn't matter anymore. Whereas in the book, it's a very juicy chapter when he's face down, and also spiritually, he's given the chance to join the good guys, saying, listen, you screwed up, it's over. But we could use your help because you're wise and powerful. If you want to join us in the fight, he's given another chance, which plays into more of the morality of the books than the movie so much. But anyway, yeah, I didn't care that they didn't have it on screen. Another really great choice was the Paths of the Dead. So in the book, Aragorn goes through the Paths of the Dead, and the dead follow him out, and they fight a battle not far from there. And the dead beat these pirates, these corsairs that have this whole bunch of ships. Once that battle's over, he releases them. Then he enlists the aid of sort of friendlies to fill up the ships, and they all go to Gondor. And they're the kind of Han Solo that when they show up, they help save the day there. And I thought it was so smart. It's a belabored two-stepper that I think Tolkien really should have himself figured it out. Like, why don't I just have the dead show up at Gondor? It'll be a cool scene, of these dead flowing in and around the city and wiping out the orcs. So Jackson probably was like, oh yeah, no, forget about the corsairs. The dead are coming to Gondor, and they're going to be the saving day when all seems to be lost. Aragorn's going to show up, and all these dead are going to flow off the ships. Like, what a smart choice that was. And again, just in keeping with the books, it just juiced things up a little bit for the screen. So I thought it was very smart. One detail that they added in the extended editions of the films was the confrontation between the Witch King of Angmar and Gandalf. In the books, the Witch King rides into Gandalf after Grond breaks the gate. The Witch King rides in on his steed. I don't think it's one of a flying dragon. I think he's on a horse in that. Could be wrong. And there's this confrontation where Gandalf says, you may not pass here. And the Witch King says, this is my hour, old man, blah, 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 blah. But before anything can happen, the horns of Rohan blow and the riders come and the Witch King bails. And then meets his demise, at the hands of Eowyn and Merry. In the film, in the extended edition, they show the confrontation, and there's this great scene where the Witch King raises his sword that starts flaming, which it does in the book as well. And there's something, as that sword is flaming, some kind of dark magic is in him. And Gandalf holds up his staff and it shatters, and Gandalf is knocked down on his butt. And it's then that the Witch King hears the horns of the Rohirrim and leaves. So in the movies, we kind of were getting the sense that Gandalf may have lost this contest, that the Witch King may have been too strong for him. So it's just a little dangling little tidbit there. We don't really know. We never really find out. Gandalf says, I think in the books and the movies, some powers that he has yet to be tested against. And he's never really tested against the Witch King fully. So we get to know whether he's going to, kick butt or not. But I thought it was great. I thought it threw a little monkey wrench in Gandalf's character, as Gandalf always kind of, in one way, Gandalf does lose a lot, and in the films, Saruman captures him. He has to escape by the eagles. He loses to the Balrog and dies. Basically, Iluvatar has to reanimate him and send him back. So it's just, I don't know. It was interesting, and I thought it was an interesting choice. And the fact that it's in the extended editions is kind of like, they didn't even bother to deal with it in the theatrical release. And the last big thing that we didn't get in the film was Scouring of the Shire. And I get it. I think, it really is a wonderful moral completion for Frodo. It's where kind of Frodo comes full circle and really changes. The hero comes home and brings really what Frodo brought home was his new sense of spirituality and morality. And I think that the Scouring of the Shire was his place to show it. But there's just, you can't, it would have been very out of place in the film. It just would have been a weird kind of left turn before the ending of the film to have, after this incredible emotional catharsis of Sauron falling, again, in a film where you're seeing all these images and hearing this incredible music, and you're seeing the heroes winning, all this amazing catharsis, you're like, oh my God, I've been 3 films, it's finally done, they won, it's incredible. To then come home to the Shire being kind of ruined in some ways, but it would have been a tough nut to swallow. As a film. So I understand why he didn't do it, and I kind of agree with him. I think it belongs in the book for sure, because it is a tough little thing of like, ooh, this nasty little side effect of the war affected, the Shire of all places that you think is kind of safe from all this big stuff that's going on. And I think it belonged in the book, but I don't think it belonged in the movie. And one last thing that was miraculous is that what they kept was Frodo failing at Mount Doom. And in the book, it's the same. Frodo gets to Mount Doom and he decides, I'm claiming the ring for my own. He gets all the way there, but the ring is too much for him and he can't, and he loses. And it takes Gollum biting off his finger and then dancing around and falling to his death, and the ring gets destroyed. In the film, they're both wrestling for the ring, but I thought it worked just as well. Like they were both, dancing on the edge of destruction. All they care about, either one of them, was getting the ring back. Kind of like the greed, in a sad way, the unavoidable, perhaps inner greed that really makes human beings what they are, which is why our society is, the way it is, why things are kind of not so great so often, is encapsulated by this one thing of like Frodo and Gollum both just like, give me the ring, no, give me the ring. And in that dance of greed, Frodo loses, Gollum wins, but of course eventually loses. And so they kept that, because so easily I could have seen them have Frodo beat off Gollum and then take the ring and said, I will destroy this for once and for all, and throw it into Mount Doom, but Gollum maybe jumping in after it, right? But Frodo fails. He does not triumph over the ring. He loses in the end. And if not for this strange confluence of him and Gollum and their own kind of greed, in a sense, nullifying evil, this very small, petty greed kind of being the thing that really destroys the great big evil in the world in some ways. Like it's twisted and genius of Tolkien to have written that. And it really just shows an incredible understanding of human nature that he has. And the fact that they kept it in the film, it's unbelievable. Like, I always wonder how many battles Jackson had to fight of all the suits sitting around saying, no, come on, this isn't, he gets to the end and then he doesn't want to do it. You can't do that, Jackson. He's got to do it. This is the movie, and he must have been like, no, you don't understand. Listen, you don't understand. I don't know how he did it. It's probably the single greatest thing that Peter Jackson has ever done is convince the suits at New Line to have that ending, in that way, be that way. So anyway, sounds ridiculous, but it is kind of a huge deal for me. So now I just want to talk briefly about the general other parts of the film. I can't fault the casting. The casting was wonderful. The only reservations I may have was Sam, the one American actor in there, with his, his British accent going in and out all the time. Sean Astin. But he was okay. He won me over by the end of the film because, he's supposed to be this earnest companion for Frodo, and he was that. So I feel like he went all in the performance. But I think at the end of the day, if it could have been someone else, I wouldn't have minded. But other than that, the casting was amazing. And what was really great, what I think is not maybe understood or thought about a lot, is the casting of the peripheral roles in a film like this is so important. Because when you go into Meduseld, and you're in Rohan, and now you meet King Theoden. King Theoden's got to be kind of a big deal in his own right, and Bernard Hill was unbelievable. Or Bernard Lee, I think it's Bernard Hill. What an incredible actor! I mean, he was an amazing Theoden, and Theoden like had enough charisma, as much charisma as kind of Aragorn did in a way. And so with the two kings when they were together, but what it does is it just creates another layer of like personal authenticity about the world, where you're like, wow, this Theoden guy's no joke. It's not just some, central casting actor who's mouthing the lines so our movie stars and heroes can kind of go through and make the scene. He had a great scene. I don't know if it made the theatrical cut because I haven't seen the theatrical cut in a long time, where he recites this poem at the grave of his son, and it's beautiful. And it's like a very powerful moment, and it's all his. And he's a peripheral character, but they give him a couple of moments that just, I don't know. I think it was a wonderful choice. Same with Denethor. John Noble, I think his name is. What an incredible actor. Denethor was a very imposing figure. Really amazing when you finally get to, Minas Tirith and Gondor. You're like, whoa, who's this? The steward? Who is this guy? And he was incredible. Very powerful actor. And they gave him some good scenes. That scene when he sends Faramir back out to die, and he's eating, the food is dripping down his mouth, and Pippin is singing. Just had a lot of gravitas. And to me, and look, Kate Blanchett as Galadriel, same deal, oozing charisma and power and strength. Same with Hugo Weaving as Elrond. Saruman as well, like, my God, Christopher Lee. He's not a main player, he's kind of a side player. But all of the peripheral characters who were supposed to be big deals in the fictional world were terrific actors and had puissance and presence and all this incredible stuff. So I really think that was a wonderful casting decisions he made for those performers. Another choice I think was terrific was keeping Sauron off screen. That was a big deal. In Tolkien, you never see him. You don't know what's going on in his head. He's not twirling his mustache, pacing up and down in the Dark Tower. I'll get that Gandalf, And you can easily see Hollywood producers being like, we don't have a bad guy here. We don't see the bad guy. What's the bad guy about? We got to have a scene, when the bad guy's a kid and his parents are beating him up or something. Or we got to see the bad guy killing and torturing people. And again, Jackson probably had to be like, you don't understand. Like he's the personification of spiritual evil, and in that sense, he is invisible. That's the danger of it. That's the hardcoreness of it, and the genius of Tolkien to keep him off screen the whole book. So, again, just having it be the eye of Sauron as just being, that's it. I thought it was amazingly well chosen. I can't believe he got away with it. One thing I want to stress overly is the horror elements in this movie. So Jackson was kind of a horror director. And it's kind of interesting to see the parallels. Sam Raimi, Spielberg, Peter Jackson, at the time, at the turn of the 2000s, these were the guys. Raimi did the Spider-Man movies. Jackson did Lord of the Rings. Spielberg was still Spielberg. He was still knocking it out of the park. But I think horror film directors, they have a more tactile sense of the world than maybe the average director. Now, what I mean to say is that, a director coming in, when you see most fantasy films, very rarely are fantasy films gritty, overly scary. They're noble and they're a spectacle, and they're usually a bit plastic. Half of them look very fake. Aragon, I'm talking about you. But to have a fantasy film that is scary and kind of gross and ugly in certain ways, to me made made the world so much better. And some of the things Tolkien described are scary, but these are some of the things I wanted to just bring to a head. The orcs that Saruman was making were not the regular orcs. He was breeding orcs with men. And there's a scene where he's birthing them out of these muck pits. And they're coming out and they have this kind of gross coating all over them, and they're full of filth and muck and dirt. They're disgusting. But it was brilliant. Like, of course they are. The orcs were supposed to be these foul creatures, as Tolkien calls them all the time. And Jackson made them foul creatures, man. The orcs were disgusting in so many ways. But that scene in particular was fantastic. Smeagol's backstory, the beginning of Return of the King, when he strangles Diego, and you stay on that scene, and there's a great sound cue that Howard Shore does, this churning sound. You watch, Smeagol pre-Gollum strangle this other character, like in a moment that's right out of a horror movie. It was very chilling. I remember seeing it. I was really thrown by it. I thought, wow, but it works because it is horrible. So again, it's allowing evil to be horrible in this fantasy realm, which makes the whole world building so much more realistic. There's a scene when Aragorn and Gimli and Legolas are looking for Merry and Pippin, and they ride up to where there was a huge battle, and you see the head of an orc on a stick, just with its tongue lolling out, cut off just on this stick, and it was like, whoa, like right in the screen, man. Another great moment. When Aragorn fights that orc at the end of Fellowship of the Ring, and he stabs it and it pulls the sword into him and goes, "Wah!" Screams at him, and Aragorn chops his head off. You're like, whoa, very, very visceral stuff. What else? The Dead Marshes was really creepy. They did a little bit more on the Dead Marshes. I mean, those dead warriors under the marshes was really scary. And if you read it in Tolkien writes it in kind of like a Lovecraftian way of like, it's a pretty scary place. And Jackson made it scary. Not just like, there are ghosts in the woods and fairies and it's fantasy movie. Like, no, man, there's some really creepy dead people in that marsh, and we're going to show you, what they are. And in the extended editions, the character, the Mouth of Sauron, which is in the books, the design of that creature, where it's just a mouth and there's no eyes, the helmet comes over its nose and everything, well, creepy as hell. So yeah, I thought that was such a wonderful way of making Tolkien's world feel real. And it did not detract from the sense of fantasy and scope that it had at all. It actually added to it, which I thought was brilliant. I mean, who would have done that? Who would have thought to bring kind of horror elements into Tolkien's fantasy world? And that it would be a terrific thing to do, and that it would really deepen the impact of everything that was going on. Like, it's a miracle. And one final thing, speaking of world building, Jackson kind of, I think he kind of invented this shot that everybody uses now, where you're seeing the heroes from a long distance riding through mountains or over streams, but the camera's way back, and it's usually panning and moving, and so you get a real sense of the scope of the landscape and the world, while you see our little, the little tiny characters in the landscape. And they do that in all three of these movies, and I've seen it now in almost every fantasy movie that's out there. They all steal that, and I think he kind of invented it. I think it was a terrific technique to do. So that's about it. That's I wanted to just talk about the difference between the books and the movies, and what I think the movies did really well. I think most of the choices were really great. I think that these three movies as fantasy movies, as adaptations, are not going to be equaled in our lifetime. I just think that the confluence of how they came together, the choices that he made, the chance that the studio was able to take on the movies, the free reign that he was able to have, and the choices that he was able to make, it's a miracle, frankly. I have the Blu-ray set, the extended edition Blu-ray set, and that's like a treasured thing that I'll have, which is wonderful. So so I hope you enjoyed my comparison of the books and movies. See you next time.